Now, at the end of the last video, we had this scene set up with 3 cubes and 3 items on top of them. We're going to just do a couple of things first, and what we're going to do now is save. So to save it, you go to File, and then the first time you save something, you do Save As. So it's got a name. So I click Save As. You will have to go to your OneDrive here to make sure you save it. It will be up here, it'll be X. Click on that, and then you give it a name wherever you want to save it. I've got my own folder, and I've called it Tutorial Video. So I type in here what I want to call it. Tutorial Video 1, and then click Save as Blender File. And that will save it. You'll see at the top that it says Tutorial Video 1. Now, next thing we need to do is learn how to navigate around the screen, because at the moment we're stuck in one position, which isn't particularly ideal. So there are 3 main ways of navigating in Blender. The first is to move around in a circle. If you hold the middle, the scroll wheel down, so it's got a little click, and if you move it, you'll rotate around a certain point, a center point. It's one way of moving, it's quite useful, but it's not the way I like to do. You've also got, if you use the scroll wheel, you zoom in and out of that one central point. So if you've got a central point set, which we're not going to look at right this second, then it's useful for that. The second way is if you click on View, you'll see you've got all of these options, which go left, right, back, front, bottom and top. And it's going to move you just to one side or the other. You'll see here that we're using perspective, because the further away this cube is, the smaller it gets, so as you'd expect to see in real life. If I turn it onto orthographic view, you'll see it completely from the side. You don't get any sense of perspective. This can be useful for modelling certain things. We're not going to use it right now for what we're doing, but just bear in mind that that is there, and that's number pad 5. And lastly, the way we are actually going to move is by going to something called fly mode. Now, fly mode is similar to how you'd be in a computer game, for instance. If you press Shift and F, you go into fly mode, and underneath our viewport, it's got a load of instructions about how to move. It says LMB, enter, or pad enter is confirm. That means stick to the position we're in. Escape, cancel, so wherever we move to, ignore that. Gravity, and then we've got WASD, or the arrows. Now these are what moves us around. So I press W or upwards and I move forwards. S or backwards and move backwards. A moves me left and D moves me right. To actually point the way we're going, I'll move the mouse. So whichever way the mouse is pointing is where we're looking. So I can then use WASD and the mouse to move to any specific area I need. When I'm happy, right up and close to the monkey's head, I can left click and it sets that position. So that is where I'm moving from. Now bear in mind that this does not affect your origin. So if I was holding down the center scroll wheel of the mouse, it doesn't rotate around where I'm close to where you'd expect. So you don't use those 2 things in conjunction. But that is moving around. So the main part of this video is looking at how to do some basic texture onto your objects. Now I'm going to drag this menu out because this has got all of the different modifiers, textures, materials, particles, everything that you can put onto these cubes you'll find on here. I'm going to right click on the first cube. So right click is how to select. I'm going to make sure I've got my screencast keys up so you can see everything I'm clicking. And when I've right clicked on this cube, I'm going to go onto this circular one. Now this is material. You can set a material onto any mesh, and what it'll do is that's what it will show on the screen when you've finished. So I'm going to click on this now, and there's none in place. But this doesn't look how I want it to look, because there are 2 different types of render engine in Blender. And it's important whenever you're starting to actually set it to the best one, the one that we really want to use, which is called Cycles Render. Now you'll find this up the top. It says Blender Render, Blender Game and Cycles Render. Now Blender Render is the old-fashioned one. It's quite quick, but it doesn't actually look realistic in any way. Second one is Blender Game. You can use Blender to create computer games. It's not the easiest way to do it. There are other software that we'd use. What we are going to use is Cycles Render. This is a really good way of representing the way that light bounces off objects and make things look a lot more realistic. So I'm going to click on Cycles Render. And now when I click on New, it gives me these options for creating a material. If it doesn't come up with this and it says Add Nodes, just click on Add Nodes and you'll see exactly this. Okay? So we've got surface. Now this has got lots of different types of surface for the cube, different ways of texture it. We're going to leave it on diffuse for now, and diffuse means it's not really going to reflect light. It's not going to be glossy, which is going to be the easiest way to look at it. So if you look around the room that you're in, there are lots of things that aren't shiny. That's kind of what diffuse is like. It's not reflecting the light in the same way. You'll understand when we see the difference between a diffuse and a glossy, and you'll kind of understand glossy. Maybe matte and glossy would be the easiest way to look at it. And I'm going to give this a colour. I'm going to make this blue. And that's all I need to do. Better name my texture and call it blue diffuse. You can call it whatever you want. Obviously, if you're doing skin, you can call it skin. If you're doing grass, you can call it grass. Whatever is relevant for that texture. Press enter, and it's saved it. My next cube, I'm going to go new again, and I want to do a glossy one this time. And I'm going to go glossy red. Now you don't have to do the same colours as me. Glossy red. So I've got a blue diffuse and glossy red. So let's do red glossy. And finally, on this last one, I'm going to do a glass effect. So new, diffuse, and glass. And this one's going to be green. Green glass. So I have put materials onto these three, but at the moment you can't see them because we're in something called solid view. If you look down here next to object mode, you've got this little circle, and this circle here represents solid mode. And you've got 6 different ways of seeing things. The first one is bounding box. Not particularly useful for what we're doing, but it's quite useful for physics and seeing if something hits something else. That's what a bounding box is really to do with what we're looking at. Wireframe has got every vertex, edge, face that is in your shape. Solid, what we're on already. Texture, you won't be able to see anything here because we're using materials rather than textures, but textures can be pictures or generated noise or clouds or anything like that that change the way that your material looks. We look at those in more detail in a later video. Next one's material. Now you'll start to see the materials, but in this view, they are just blocks. And finally, we look at rendered. Now this isn't going to look quite right at the moment because actually you can't see the glossiness or the diffuseness or the glass. You can partially see the glassiness of the green one. And that is because there are 2 things that really help to show what you see. One of them is the actual colour. The second one is the light source. Imagine you were in a room and all the lights were off and there was no light at all. You wouldn't actually see anything. It doesn't matter what colour things are in the room. You wouldn't be able to tell that. And it's the same when there's a dim light. You can't necessarily tell if things are glossy. I'm going to go back to solid mode and we've got this one tiny little light here and we've got the environment casting light. I'm going to make things worse. I'm actually going to get rid of this light because it's not really doing a huge amount for us. And instead, I'm going to put in a plane. I'm going to put 2 planes in. First plane, I'm going to put as kind of like a floor. Now, light does not always go directly to what we're seeing. Just move this up a bit. It doesn't go directly to a room. If you imagine you're in a room and you've got a window open, but you can't see the sun, the room will still be lit up because the sun will be reflecting off different surfaces. And that's what this plane is going to do. So we've got a plane here, which is just going to be like a reflective board to give us more light. And I'm going to create a second plane and make it a bit bigger. And I'm going to rotate it on the y-axis so it's facing these 3 things. Now the bigger it is, the more light it's going to give off because we are going to use one more different type of texture. And this is going to be the emission texture. Now, if something emits light, it gives out light. So, by that logic, if I go into emission and set this to something like 30, it's going to be emitting white light. Now, if I go on to rendered again, you'll see things are starting to take shape. Your glass one here, you can see through it, very much looking glassy. Your glossy one here, you can start to see a few reflections in it. It's not quite as obvious right now, but you can see reflections in here of the other side of this plane. It's perfectly in line, strangely enough. You can see the reflections of the monkey. That's not a shadow, that's a reflection in the glossy surface. But in the diffuse one, you don't see any reflections. Now you'll notice I'm going to solid mode to move around. That's not necessary, but if I show you what happens when I'm in rendered mode and move around, what it does is it's rendering every time, which is something that's quite intensive, especially for our computers. So that's why I tend to go into solid mode. It's a bit faster to move around. Now that's great, but it's still not, well, the things on top of the cubes haven't got any texture on, and they look kind of naff at the moment. So we're going to first off look at using the same textures. I'm going to right click on the torus. Now I could go on to new and create the texture again, but actually the quicker way to get it exactly the same, this little icon here next to new allows me to browse the other textures that I've got. So we know the first one was blue diffuse, so I'll click on that, and it's set it to exactly the same settings. And it's connected, so if I was to change it on here, it would change it on the cube. If I wanted to do my red glossy, okay, and finally the green glass. If you did want this one to be a slightly different colour, you'd have to click on this number, because this represents how many times this texture is being used. So if I wanted to create a new version, I click on that button, give it a slightly different name. It can be dubbed 0.001, but that's not ideal. Green glass ball, and let's actually make this a bright yellow glass. And now if we render it, you'll see you've got the diffuse cube with the torus on top, the glossy cube with a monkey on top, and the green glass cube with a yellow glass sphere on top. Still, however, we've got a few issues like this. I'm going to go close into the monkey, and you'll see all of these planes are quite large. Bit of rendered move. And that looks pretty rubbish, to be honest. So what we can do is something called smoothing. If I right click on this guy here and then go to tools, one of them is smooth shading. If I press that, automatically it looks as if it hasn't got all the lines there, which is exactly what we want for this situation. I'm going to do exactly the same for the torus, and exactly the same for this sphere. Now when I go to rendered, they look a lot better. They still don't look perfect. There's a limit to how much it will do, but that's smooth shading. Finally, I'm going to make this scene complete by changing or making a texture for this plane. Obviously, we're using it to deflect light, so although diffuse still does deflect sunlight, I'm going to do glossy. I'm going to make it slightly silvery. Let's get this up on the screen. Now that's completely like sheet metal. Let's make it a little bit brighter than that. So that's very much like a mirror. But I don't want it to be quite like a mirror. I'm going to put some roughness on it to 0.2. And now what you'll see is it's almost like a brushed metal effect. You can see the light here where it's glowing because it's fading out towards the edges because of the roughness of the material. You can see the different colours coming across, and it will build as it goes along. But it's just a different kind of effect, so it's not completely mirrored. And that is how to do your very basic materials with Blender, how to reuse ones. Let's just name this one, for instance, brushed metal. And finally, how you move around a scene in fly mode. So there we are. Make sure you save, and this is where I'd like you to reach and show me by the end of this lesson.